Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another episode of What's Up Doc. I'm your host, Dr. Al-Barwani, and I'm a board certified family physician. My show, What's Up Doc, is a production of Muslim Network TV, the only Muslim focused network broadcasting in North America. You can watch us 24/7, streaming on Apple TV, Fire TV, Roku TV, and Galaxy 19 satellite. You can also find us streaming nearly every day on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Muslim Network TV and on our website at muslimnetwork.tv. Today we're going to be talking about a really exciting topic, one that affects more than 50 million Americans each year and up to a third of the population worldwide. And it's thought to be the sixth leading cause of chronic illness in the United States, according to the Allergy and Asthma Foundation of America. Joining us in that discussion is Dr. Salima Thibani. Dr. Thibani is a dual board-certified internist, allergist, and immunologist. She currently practices at a large healthcare organization in Southern California. Her current interests include improving and empowering patients' understanding of asthma and allergies. Dr. Thibani thrives on building a long-lasting and trusting relationship with her patients and their families. She's also married to an ER doctor, and together they have 4 children, ages 4, 5, 7, and 8 years old. She enjoys fitness and spends her spare time raising awareness on diastasis recti and empowering mothers to incorporate fitness into their lives so they may feel and look their very best after babies. Welcome, Dr. Thibani.
Hi.
I'm so excited that you had time for us between your husband and your 4 kids and the work that you do. This is
thank you for having me, and thank you for
absolutely. I'm really excited to talk about this topic, especially this time of the year, because as an allergy sufferer myself, I feel the pain. Spring has sprung, as they say, and there is so much in the air that's causing havoc to people's eyes, noses, and sinuses. And so I thought this would be a great time to talk about allergies, essentially.
Absolutely.
So let's get started by talking about essentially what are allergies for people who are lucky enough not to have those symptoms of allergies or allergic rhinitis, etc. Let's talk about what they are and how they're caused.
Okay. So, when we say my allergies are flared up, most people are referring to their nasal and eye allergies, right? So mainly focused on, having allergies to the eyes, which is itchy eyes, watery eyes, runny eyes, nose, presenting with nasal congestion, itching of the nose, a lot of mucus, runny nose. Sometimes it drips forward, sometimes it drips backwards. It can also cause sometimes a tickle in your throat. It can cause pressure in the ears. And then, it actually can also go into your lower airways. So there's also, allergies that cause asthma. Okay. And then there's, I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but there's food allergies and skin allergies. So oftentimes when people say, my allergies, it's sort of the umbrella term. Okay. And then we break it down into the nasal allergies, the ocular allergies, the respiratory allergies, the skin allergies, and food allergies. And there are a lot of different causes for each of them. And the most common one is going to be, when we think of the nose and the lungs and the eyes, are things like, dust allergies and pollen allergies.
Absolutely. Gosh, it like you said, it's such a wide ranging or wide covering umbrella, and there's so many different aspects to it. I guess let's focus in the beginning at least on some of the more common ones, which are the nasal and the respiratory, and then the ones that affect the eye as well, just because that's what I typically see. That's probably what you see a lot of. And some of the other, I think there is definitely overlap into skin and food allergies, and we may have a chance to talk about that at the end of this show, which I'm excited to talk about because all of it is very relevant, and they all kind of all interact with it. Yeah, exactly. There's like this, if you think of a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. And so let's talk. I quoted some numbers from a source that I found, but tell me, in your experience, how common are some of these symptoms that you're seeing? How common is it that you're having someone come to you? Because I know definitely as a primary care provider, I'm probably the first line to see these symptoms, but in your experience as a specialist, what are the numbers you're seeing? How common are the people coming to you?
I mean, that's all I see, because I'm an allergist. And
never mind.
all for allergies. And I mean, I definitely over the last decade of practicing medicine and, being just an allergist, I will say I have definitely noticed more and more people coming and complaining. My allergies used to start in March, and now I'm seeing them in February. And now I'm seeing them even, especially out here in LA, where we don't get like frost or rain a lot. So things are literally pollinating throughout the year. And, we're seeing allergy season as early as January. We're seeing trees pollinating, right? So it is a serious, serious problem. And, and I'm fortunate to see both, the very, very young, right, really young kids, to the geriatric, the older population, and everything in between. And so when we actually look at, prevalence of allergies, it's reported that, anywhere between 10 to 30% of the population has allergies, and kids up to 40%. That's a lot, right? And most of it is also underreported. So I don't think we even have a true handle on how much allergy is actually out there.
Gosh, absolutely. And something I was listening to or hearing about was how, with, not to get into climate change, but I'm going to get into climate change.
It's so important.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons that we are seeing this phenomenon, as you described, where allergies are getting worse every year. Things are just in bloom earlier, greenhouse effect, et cetera. All of that is causing just more and more things to be blooming throughout the year. And now we are, whereas someone might have had it only have symptoms for a few months out of the year, they're, just like you described, experiencing it for longer and throughout the year even. That being said, there is a difference, though. There are people in general who have seasonal allergies, and then there are perennial allergies, which is year-round. And let's kind of break that down a little bit, because sometimes my patients are a little bit confused when I ask them to take medicines year-round as opposed to when I ask them to take it during allergy season or the time that they're experiencing symptoms. So let's break that down a little bit for our viewers.
Oh, absolutely. So when we're talking about seasonal allergies, it's usually referring to pollen, right? So there are certain pollens that pollinate during certain times of the year. So for example, springtime is when you're going to find the trees pollinating. Summertime is when you're going to find the grasses pollinating. And then in the fall is when you're going to find a lot of the weed pollen, okay? And so some people who are only allergic to, say, trees will only find their symptoms during the springtime, and then the rest of the year they're fine. And then you had mentioned, perennial allergens. So that's what we call year round, right? So these are things like dust, right? Believe it or not, cockroach. I used to do a lot of inner city asthma, and a lot of what we used to see was allergies caused to, people living in these urban crowded apartment buildings, and cockroach was a big source of their allergies, both nasal and allergic asthma. And then we're going to also have, pet allergies. And so pet allergies are things like, your cat, your dog, your parrot, you can actually be allergic to feathers. Yeah. And those types of allergies, you're sort of exposed to every day, the idea is. So your symptoms can be every day.
Absolutely. And for a lot of my patients, it's very disappointing. They're very disappointed, I should say, when they find out they're allergic to their pet, like they just got it, and then they suddenly start having symptoms. And so it's very disappointing to them to find out that they're allergic to them. So when we talk about some of the symptoms that you mentioned, because they are so wide ranging, how important, or is it important to treat these symptoms? Because I have patients who have these symptoms either day in, day out, or during certain times of the year, and they're okay with it. They've learned to adjust. They're carrying tissues all the time. They've just adjusted their lifestyle to their symptoms. So is it important, when we move into talking to our patients about managing and treating, how important is it for them to be on medication or to do something about their allergies if they're comfortable with the symptoms?
Absolutely. And, this is a conversation that I have all the time with my patients, because I'll see some patients who have a little bit of the sniffles, but they just want to know what they're allergic to, right? And then they come in, we chat, and they're feeling fine otherwise. But then I look inside their nose and I'm like, holy moly, there's so much inflammation. And then they're like, what? Should I be on meds? And I'm like, no. Okay. So the way it works is, I can look inside your nose and it can be really inflamed. But if you're like, hey, I'm sleeping well at night, I'm not congested, I'm not snoring, especially for the younger kids, I'm like, if your child is active and playing and the teacher isn't complaining that, your child is coughing or like, sneezing or connected to a tissue box and their quality of life and sleep is not impaired, then absolutely, I'm not going to be that person who's like, you got to do the Flonase because, I saw large, stuff inside your nose. Absolutely not. But if you come to me and we test you and you're allergic to a bunch of things and you're like, I'm snoring and my nose is congested and I'm connected to a tissue box. I can't even play, a sport outside or go for a hike. I'm not exercising because I can't be outdoors. Then we got to treat that, right? Because now you have changed your behavior, right? In the way you live your life. And then I want to help you because I want you to live your best life, right? And that's where I think medicines can actually help.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And that's precisely what I tell my patients. Essentially, you tell me when you're ready or when things are getting bad enough that you want to be on something or you'd like some help, because just like you said, if they're otherwise living their best life and they're not having any problems with those symptoms, then I have no problems with the symptoms. But it's when, like you said, it's affecting their quality of life or their ability to do things they enjoy. Absolutely. It's time to talk about some options. And then I let the patient decide. I kind of run them through and say, this is what I would recommend. But ultimately it's up to you.
And I always start with other things that you can do as far as environmental control measures, right? Okay. Like, so, if you, for example, know that you have a springtime allergen that you're allergic to, and that's your season, there are a few things that you can do that have nothing to do with medicine, right? So very basic things like you can actually, wherever you are, whatever city you live in, you can follow the pollen counts, right? So this is a way for you to know how active things are. And it's a very simple scale. They'll do things like the pollen counts are low, medium, or high. When it's in that medium to high range and you have, say, for example, a picnic or a hike planned outside, well, maybe you might want to change that for that day, because if your allergies are going to flare up, they're going to flare up when you're outside on that hike, right? Other things that I recommend are little things like no shoes, perhaps at least in your bedroom. I always am telling my patients, try to keep your bedroom the cleanest place, right? So shoes out of the bedroom. When you come home from like vigorous outdoor activity, try to at least wash your hands, focusing on wiping down your face, especially your eyes and your nose. So if you have any pollen in there, you just sort of flush it out. Ideally, for the younger kids, if they've played their soccer or baseball, throw them in a shower, hose them down, put on a new pair of clothes, because the pollen is sticking on your hair, your skin, your clothes, your shoes, right? And so, imagine you just come in and then you plop yourself inside on top of your bed. Now your bed is covered with that pollen, right? Exactly. So just having these little simple things actually makes a huge impact. And people who are even pet allergic, pollen allergic, getting just an air purifier is really important, right? And sort of, keeping that on in your bedroom windows closed, and, sort of having your room have the cleanest air. It's all very helpful. And, when we make these recommendations, I have a ton of patients who are like, they didn't even realize something so simple was going to make such a drastic impact, that some of them don't even end up on medications because of these lifestyle changes that they implement.
I love that. I am a big fan of that pollen count when I look at the weather. I'm always looking at the pollen count, and just like you said, it's pretty simple. It's you can usually, you look it up, Google it, or if you have a weather app, it'll usually be listed. And even on the news, when they talk about the weather, they'll, especially during allergy season, they'll mention pollen count. And so I'm always like, okay, tomorrow I'm staying home or whatever it is, and particularly, I know we didn't talk about our patients with asthma, but also it does apply to our patients with asthma to pay attention to that, because of the fact that pollen, for a lot of people who have allergies and asthma, the two do, again, there's overlap there, so that one can trigger symptoms of the other. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to go back. I know you gave me the best segue to talk about treatment, but I want to go back a second. And because you mentioned earlier about getting tested for allergies. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of patients who I refer to get testing, or we have someone who comes to our office every now and then to do that. Uh-huh. So let's talk about what that entails, because I think people are a little bit confused about what it can tell us and what it can't tell us. I'll have people come in and say, I think I have mold in my home. I need to be tested for asthma,
Mhm.
if I'm allergic. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, we can test you. That won't tell me if you have allergies in, mold in your home.
Right,
But so
right.
let's talk about what the testing is and what it's not, and how it can be helpful for our patients' diagnosis.
Yeah. So, there's a couple mechanisms. The most common, if you're coming in to see an allergist, we commonly will use what we call a skin prick test, right? And so that's like a panels that if for children, we'll probably use their back, but for adults, we like to use their forearms. And depending on the allergist, usually there's about 30-ish items on there, allergens on there. And each area is very different. So my panel in Southern California is going to be very different than an allergist who is seeing patients on the East Coast where different things are pollinating during the springtime, summertime, and fall. Okay. And then there's also the perennial allergens, which are going to be the same: the cat, the dog, the feather, the dust, the cockroach. Okay. And mold is also on there. Okay. Now, mold is interesting because mold spores are very common. They're found in soil and wood piles, typically on the ground, very, very common. But there are people who can be sensitized to mold, meaning, if they had a water leak in their home and mold starts to grow, they might notice their sort of asthma and allergies flare up. Now, I do think every home is going to have some sort of, I know there are people who, send people out to do mold surveys and all this stuff. You're going to find mold in the home because things like Alternaria, Aspergillus, Cladosporium, they're very, very common. The other time mold presents a problem is, so not only if you have like a water leak or you're finding actual mold in the home from like moisture and stuff, but when there's when the dry winds kick in, because in LA, there's a lot of Santa Ana winds that come in, that roll in. And so what that does, that takes everything from the ground, brings it into the air, and then you inhale it, right? But actual mold spores, when they're on the ground, you're not inhaling, so they shouldn't be a problem. But when you come in for skin testing, it's very, very simple. They put the panels on, they wait 20 minutes, and then in 20 minutes, you get a read. The allergist will read it and interpret it for you, okay? And that's how it works. Now, what's interesting is some people will just want to know, I just want to know what I'm allergic to, right? And if you have no symptoms, so no baseline symptoms, and you just want to know what you're allergic to, there's going to be a lot of things that might light up, but it absolutely means nothing, right? And we get that a lot because there are some people who are like, I have a dog, but the thing says I'm allergic to the dog. What does that mean? It means nothing, right? So you always have to look back at the sort of clinical history of what does the patient have? So if I have a patient who has runny nose, itchy, watery eyes, I test them and now they're dog allergic and they have a dog, then it's like, okay, we're going to connect the two pieces together, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, as with anything in medicine, it's going back to the clinical picture and talking to the patient. And that's why it's so important to get a good history, to really tell your doctor, to our viewers, to let your doctor know what's going on. Otherwise, we're taking things out of context and misinterpreting things at times. So that's an important point to note. I want to continue this conversation. We do have to take a quick break here, and we'll be back and talk some more. You're watching What's Up Doc on Muslim Network TV, and we'll be back after this short break.
A free online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear. Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Find out how to use an awkward silence to help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to What's Up Doc. Today we are talking about allergies, and joining us in that discussion is Dr. Salima Thobani. Before the break, Dr. Thobani, we were talking about what are the symptoms of allergies, how do we kind of identify and test for allergy symptoms, and specifically we're talking about eyes, nose, and respiratory for now. And it doesn't really also, the testing applies to food allergies as well, and probably skin too with the testing that we just talked about, right? But now let's move into what are some treatment options. You talked about some management, you talked about getting an air purifier in the home might be a good idea. Some measures like taking off their shoes and rinsing their hands, their face, and maybe even if they can their bodies before, as soon as they come into the house. And that's another great one. I want to know about humidifiers. I have patients ask me about humidifiers since you talked about purifiers earlier. Does that help at all, or are purifiers a better investment for patients?
Yeah, so they're two separate things, right? So when I'm talking about an air purifier, right? So these are the things that have a HEPA filter built into it, okay? So a HEPA filter is one of those filtration systems that actually take the air, okay, bring it in, and think about it, it basically sucks in the pollen spores, the pollen grains, the mold spores, the pet danders, and then spits out clean air for you. Okay. And the humidifier is completely something different. The humidifier works by basically increasing the sort of what we call the humidity level in the air. So if your room is really dry, or if you're in a dry area and you need to increase, the humidity level, you can use a humidifier. So, some people will use this when they're sick and stuff. But my thing is this: when you use a humidifier, right, you have to be very careful in the way you clean it. I have had patients who do not clean their humidifiers properly. And humidifiers are not circulating your air, cleaning your air, none of that stuff. And in fact, they will actually collect mold in there if they are not cleaned properly because of water in there, that they will then spit out mold spores. So two very separate things. Now, coming down to air purifiers, I will say there are so many brands out there. They're all great, okay? I would suggest two things. One is make sure it has a HEPA filter in it, because that's probably the most well-studied filtration unit, okay? And two, look at the square footage, okay? And I have a very funny story. My brother he has allergies, and he had this really large, great HEPA unit, in his room. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's gonna, do your whole room perfectly. I didn't really relay to him. What I meant was like that unit was appropriate to your room size and it was going to cover the unit very well.
Yeah.
Later down, he sort of swapped it out for this really cute, not space occupying unit. And I looked over there and I was like, I laughed because I was like, this is going to cover basically one section of the room.
Yeah.
So you always want to look at the square footage. That is really important. So I don't care which brand you get. I don't have a special, preference, but make sure it's a HEPA filter and look at the square footage the unit covers. And that's why some people actually have to buy multiple units, right? So one for the living room, one for the bedroom, because not one unit is going to do everything.
Exactly. Thank you for making sure that we're clear on those two things. And so definitely for someone who has allergies, the purifier is a better investment is what it sounds like. And if you are getting a humidifier, make sure that you're cleaning it well and regularly so that you're not introducing or allowing for mold to be introduced into those humidifiers and making your allergies worse. Okay, great. So let's move on to talking about some other measures. I like that you started out by talking about some non-medicinal treatment options. Are there other things? I know that patients love to talk to me about neti pots and sinus rinses. So maybe tell me what your opinion is on those, or if there are other non-medicinal things that you recommend before we start talking about medications.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sinus rinse is great, and a lot of patients do love it. So I feel like there's two things. There's a love and a hate relationship with sinus rinse, right? I don't know if you've ever tried it. So I usually will try all things before, so I know I can explain it to my patients, right? So I went ahead and tried it, and I don't have allergies, so I didn't find it anything great, but patients who have a lot of mucus and a lot of congestion absolutely love it, right? And the way this works is, you take distilled water, or you're going to take, you can use tap water, but you got to boil it and bring it down to room temperature, okay? And then you go ahead, and usually you can find recipes online and make it yourself, or you can buy that they have these little packages. It looks like salt, but it's not salt, so don't just take like table salt and put it in there, because then you will ruin the inside of your nasal mucosa and actually make it raw, and it's not a good experience. I've had patients do that. So there's a good combination of stuff that goes into it. So it's pH neutral. You open it, you put it in, you shake, and then really you have to be over the sink, or you have to be in the shower, because it can be quite an experience. And you're going to take it's funny, but you're going to take the tip of the nostril, shove it up one side, and it's a high pressure system. So when you squeeze, you're going to feel water go shooting up, and it's going to come out the other side. And it's a great way to sort of clean out your nose. If you're going to do that, I always recommend doing that. You can do it once a day, twice a day, in the morning, but you're going to do it before you start any of the medications your doctor would have prescribed, right? Because imagine if you use your nasal spray that has medicine in it, and then you clean out your nose. All that
wash it right out. Yeah.
Okay. Other things, I think we touched on a lot of good things. I think for dust mite allergies, I do want to chime in and say, washing your bedding once a week in hot water is really important. You can also buy dust mite proof covers. So these are like covers. You can go to any bedding store, they now have them, and you put your pillows on there, you wrap your pillows in these they're called dust mite proof or dust mite impermeable covers, okay? And then you can do the same thing for your mattresses, okay? And a lot of times now, a lot of people are dust conscious, so a lot of mattresses are actually being even made dust mite proof, which is really awesome, okay? Other things, stuffed animals carry a lot of dust. So if your child is dust allergic, you might want to just hone it down, bring down the number of stuffed animals they can sleep with. I usually say pick one or two, and one or two small ones, so that you can quickly throw them in the washer to wash them weekly, right? And then as far as if you're outdoors, we talked about the shoes and stuff and changing your clothes. But if you're in the car as well, windows up, AC on, so you're sort of circulating that air from the inside and not bringing the outside air in. And then, windows are down and all that pollen is coming in. So those are the non-medicinal things that you can do before we even start medicine.
Absolutely. I love those. I really love those, especially the pets, or the stuffed toys or animals for our kids. Okay. So another thing, again, that I get a lot of questions about from my patients has to do with local honey. And so this is something I have heard a lot, even in my training, and patients are asking me about all the time. And that is you take local honey during allergy season to help desensitize yourself to the local allergens and local pollen. Have a small teaspoon every day, and that's going to help you with your allergies. So let's hear your opinion on that, because I've heard a lot of things that kind of contradict that.
You can tell by my face that I'm kind of like, so this is the thing. So most people are not allergic to the larger pollen. So like things like the colorful plants and flowers that you see, like roses, you're not allergic to that because the pollen grains are so large that you're not inhaling it, right? And so for me, it doesn't make sense. It actually doesn't make sense at all. So, you know, I'm all about evidence-based medicine, and I'm also open to trying things, you know. So if you're coming into my office, if you want to try it, you can try it. I just don't know the evidence backing it up. I can't really explain the science backing it up to you. So if you're coming in to see me, I can offer you the stuff that I know works, and I can give you the data and the science behind it. And if that doesn't work, I can, you know, pair it up with something else. I'm definitely not opposed to trying different things. I just know in that situation with the honey, for me, it's hard to make the connection.
Yeah. I mean, there are other good reasons to have local honey, just maybe not for your allergies.
Well, it's like, you know, turmeric. I grew up with turmeric, right? I have 4 kids, like I talked about, right? And my mom, anytime they start coughing, she'll take turmeric and honey. And we all get it. And I do it, and I've done it I did it growing up, and my kids are doing, you know, and it's fine. But I'm also like not opposed to, well, get to a point we need to use medicines. We're going to use medicines too. And we can use the turmeric.
Exactly. We included ginger in ours. Ginger and honey was a big one in our house. Okay, so now we've exhausted things that are non-medicinal. Let's talk about medications, because there are also several options when it comes to medications. And so generally speaking, I guess we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty, but generally speaking, what are the options that you're offering your patients?
Right. So I always tell people this: all of our allergy medications are now over the counter. I mean, and people are always like, but I want the prescription stuff. And I tell them, no, this is the thing, you know, it's over the counter because the FDA feels that it is safe and it's effective. And it's not fair to someone who suffers from allergies but can't afford or have health insurance that they have to, you know, see a doctor to get a prescription. So it's so safe that things have moved over the counter. So a lot of the allergy stuff is stuff that you can find at your local CVS, Walmart, Rite Aid, you know, you name it, you'll see it at a local pharmacy, okay? When you walk into that pharmacy, it can sort of be like, whoa, what, you know, the cold allergy section is really large, right? So one thing I'd like to tell people is not all nasal sprays are created equally, okay? So keeping that in mind, when you have nasal congestion and you have inflammation in your nose, we want to decrease that inflammation. Okay. So how are we going to do that? And the recommendations are not just me pulling stuff out of a hat. These are just guideline-based, evidence-based recommendations, right? So for the first sort of, like, if you think about treatment for allergies in a pyramid, you know, the cornerstone of treatment is what we call, you know, steroids. So intranasal steroids. So for examples of this would be things like Flonase, Nasacort, Nasonex, Rhinocort, those are what we call steroids. They're all the same class. So you're not going to be on a Flonase and a Nasonex because that doesn't make sense. They're both intranasal steroid sprays. Now, the purpose behind a steroid spray is to decrease inflammation. Because if you came into my office and I looked inside your nose, the chances are I'm going to see something that's what we call turbinates, and they're inside of your nose. And when you inhale, say, a grass pollen, the turbinates inside your nose they just have this big party and produce a lot of inflammation. And normally your turbinates are supposed to be flat, but when you have allergies, they become really round like soccer balls. And so what we want to do is when we give you an anti-inflammatory, and that's what a nasal steroid spray is, we're sort of making them flat again. Okay, so that's number one. The next thing we like to do is we'll do antihistamines. So antihistamines are your medications like Claritin, Allegra, Zyrtec, Zizal, and generics are 100% the same for me, okay? I just say these names because people have, you know, they've marketed it so well, people hear Claritin and they know what I'm talking about, okay? So you're going to go ahead and use that. And that works a lot great with like the itching that you're having and the sneezing that you're having, or like people feel itchy at the back of their throat or itching in the ears. So, and you can use that in conjunction. So nasal spray plus the antihistamine. In this area, I would probably say most people will come into my office and they're like using Benadryl. Benadryl is great.
To say that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great antihistamine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been around for a very long time, and it's what we call our first generation of antihistamines, right? So what people don't realize is, well, they do after they take it, but Benadryl crosses the blood-brain barrier, which means it enters and makes you sleepy and groggy for most people, right? So that's number one. And number two, it actually does not have a 24-hour effect, okay? So it actually needs to be dosed every 4 to 6 hours, right? So not only is it making you sleepy, but it's not giving you that 24-hour effect. And that's where all these other second-generation antihistamines come into play that I just mentioned, okay? Now, I know there's so much information I'm giving you, but there's other nasal steroid sprays. So we start steroid sprays. There's also now nasal antihistamine sprays, right? So the idea is, well, you can take a Claritin, but that's a pill and that kind of goes everywhere, right? But you can also take a nasal antihistamine spray. And so that is just, again, a nasal spray like your Flonase or your steroid spray. It's going directly into your nose, localized treatment, right? And that can be, you can actually use the Flonase and the nasal antihistamine spray together. And in fact, together they can have a synergistic effect as well, okay? And then going from there, there's other medications like Montelukast, but that one is a prescription that your doctor would be providing you. At this point, I would say there's one medication that really I like to caution people about, and that's Afrin, okay? And Afrin is a nasal decongestant, okay? It is not meant for allergies. It's meant for a cold and to use for, and the box, people don't even realize this. The box actually says don't use for more than 72 hours, so no more than 3 days, right? And I have so many patients that come in with seasonal allergies and they've been using the Afrin, and they're like, doctor, when I try to stop using it, I'm like worse. And Afrin does something. So basically it goes to your blood vessels in your nose and sort of constricts it transiently. But if you use it every single day and then stop it, you get this like rebound. It's called rhinitis medicamentosa, sorry. And it's this rebound congestion and essentially making you feel even worse, right? And so that is one nasal spray that I'm like, it serves no purpose for allergies, okay? Unless you're very, very careful and only going to use it for like 48 hours.
Absolutely. You touched on everything that I was going to follow up on, which was Benadryl. I have all my well, not all, but a number of my patients come in and they're like, you know, doc, this Benadryl, I'm taking it and I just feel so tired afterwards and symptoms are only better for a few hours. And I'm like, you're saying everything that, you know, that really is explained by the nature of medication. And so I have to kind of break it down and explain to them, you know, there are better options. Let's use second generation, just like you mentioned. And then the other thing is Afrin. That's another very common one that I'm seeing, where they're using nasal decongestant sprays that are meant, just like you said, on the box it says do not use for more than 2 to 3 days. And I have to tell and remind patients that, you know, you need to read instructions before starting medication. And because there are so many options, even though these medications are over the counter, it's probably a good idea to talk with your doctor first, and then they can guide you. Even if they're not writing you a prescription, if you're confused about where to go, if you're just starting out on this journey to treat your symptoms, because just like you said, Dr. Thibani, there are so many options, and it's hard for a lot of patients, to know, you know, the brands, the different names in the brands, as opposed to looking at the generic names and understanding that they're equal. So definitely talk to your provider so that they can guide you to the right one, the right medication.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I sometimes will scope out the pharmacy to see what it's at. It's daunting. It's scary because it's like, where do you start? And it's not the patient's fault, right? Like you're just trying to get relief because you feel miserable. And the only reason I know about Afrin is because, hey, I'm a doctor and I know this, but like, it's very confusing because you're like, there's so many nasal sprays and they advertise it in a way too, to help with the you're like, oh, this will help with my symptoms, not realizing, you know.
And then, and another one that I just thought of that my patients always take or often take are those multi-symptom medications like the cough and cold and sinus. And again, again, those are not meant to, and they're dosing them every 4 hours, right? They're really meant for cold and congestion, the congestion that comes with colds, and not the congestion that comes with allergies. And so that's something I tell my patients as well.
I agree. I totally agree with that. I mean, decongestants can have some role, like Sudafed, for example. Like, and again, be cautious, because if you have high blood pressure, you got to be careful with that stuff, because it's going to make that blood pressure go up. It can make your heart beat fast. But, you know, for a couple of days, Sudafed is the same thing. It's a couple of days when things get really, really bad. But again, you know, if we go back to the underlying problem, which is like you're producing inflammation. And so we're trying to target the inflammation. And that's why things like the nasal steroid sprays work so well, and they do work well, but they do take consistent use, right? And that's the other thing. Is some people will be like, I tried the Flonase for 2 days and nothing happened. It's going to work over time. So you've got to give it, you know, do it for the couple weeks. And then, you know, I usually, once I start a treatment plan like that, I'll be like, okay, we're going to come back in a month and really tell me how things went, you know?
Absolutely. Again, a very common thing that I hear is, I took it for 2 days, or they're taking it as needed. And I'm like, no, you have to take it consistently. So I'm glad that you're echoing a lot of things that I'm seeing as well and telling my patients. I love this discussion that we're having, but we do have to stop for a little bit right here and take a quick break. You're watching What's Up Doc on Muslim Network TV, and we'll be back after this short break.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans, and soon they will be available to everyone.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
I want to go back to work, and I want to be able to move around.
To visit with Michelle's mom, to hug her and see her on her birthday.
You know, I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
We've lost enough people, and we've suffered enough damage.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, it's important for our fellow citizens to get vaccinated.
I'm getting vaccinated because we want this pandemic to end as soon as possible.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
Now it's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Find out how to use an awkward silence to help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
A free online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to What's Up Doc on Muslim Network TV. I'm your host, Dr. Aalia Al-Barwani, and today we are joined by Dr. Salima Thobani, a board-certified allergy and immunologist, and we are talking about allergies today. So before the break, Dr. Thobani, we were talking about all things related to medication and treatment, and we broke down a little bit, I think. There's still so much to be said because there's just a vast variety of different medications over the counter, but it's essentially what we said is if you're confused or more confused by this, then just talk to your doctor, but know that there are multiple options for you that we can guide you to. Now, something that I talk to patients about, or patients ask me about really, because I'm usually referring at this point, is use of allergy shots. And so let's talk about what that is, what is in an allergy shot, and at what point are we recommending to our patients that they may need to start thinking about getting those.
Yes. So allergy shots it's so strange, but we are, once you've been skin tested, we are then literally mixing, a concoction of the stuff that you're allergic to. So every patient has a different mixture, right? So if my skin testing shows I'm allergic to cat, dog, dust, and grass, that's going to be in my allergy shot or perhaps shots. So some people get anywhere from 1 to 5 shots. Okay. And we are literally injecting you. So it's not going into the muscle. It's going into like what we call the sub-Q the fat. So it doesn't really hurt. And it's a small little needle, but we're injecting you with the stuff that you're allergic to. And I know this sounds so crazy and bizarre, but allergy shots have been taking place for over 100 years, okay? And only recently, I would say over the last 2 decades, have we understood the science behind why it works. But for the last 100 years, we've been doing it and we know that it works, okay? And what we've come to realize is that it is the one thing that I call disease modifying, right? So all these years you could be allergic to dust, and now I'm going to give it to you in the form of an injection. It gets, sent into certain parts of your immune system called your lymph nodes, and you start to slowly, as we do this slowly over time. So really, when you're on allergy shots, you're coming in weekly for a little while, okay, and then monthly, and you do that for like 5 years, right? And I'm changing the way your body sees dust, okay? So I'm literally teaching your immune system from wanting to behave allergically to dust to non-allergically, right? So because a lot of times people are like, I want allergy shots, I'm going to do it. And then I tell them this long 5-year commitment, right? 3 to 5 years roughly. And they're like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, I know, and they work, but the commitment part is like the hardest part, right? So if you're just going to do it for like 6 months to a year, I'm always like, don't even bother, because when we haven't gotten to the point where we're actually changing your immune system, like on a cellular level. So allergy shots work great. I would say 80+% of my patients love them, right? Who gets offered them? I think anybody, right? There are some patients I walk in through the door that are like, I don't want medicine, I just want the shots. And then I have other patients who are like, I want to try the medicine, and if that doesn't work, then I'll do the shots, right? So it's sort of having a conversation, and it's very different based on, personal preferences, right? And of course, allergy shots don't come without risk, right? So because I'm injecting you with stuff that you're allergic to, one of the biggest risks is having what we call an anaphylactic, or a reaction that's so severe where, your face might swell up and you can't breathe. And so every patient that gets an allergy shot gets monitored for 30 minutes. And for some people, that's something they don't like or they don't want, right? So I tell patients, once we identify what you're allergic to, at any point in the treatment course, allergy shots are an option.
Awesome. So it sounds like essentially this is a way, just like you said, disease modifying. So it's something that maybe over the time of span of a few years, if this does work for you, then you can be off of medications altogether. So it's a nice long-term commitment in treatment, but also in the treatment process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never say, I don't like to use the word, you're going to be cured of allergies, but, because what ends up happening is some patients, they hit that 3 to 5 year mark, they're off their meds, but then a whole decade later, their allergies, for some reason, new sensitizations, new things happen, and they're coming back, right? And then the shots again. And I do actually see that, very frequently. But then they're like, the shots worked for 10 years and I was great. And now I'm allergic to something.
Yeah, there's that. Exactly. Well, that brings me to my next question, which has to do with this fluctuation in our immune system where, for example, someone may have been allergic to something when they were younger and then they outgrow an allergy. And then conversely, like you said, as adults can develop new allergies. So when we think about, let's start with the first example where kids potentially can outgrow allergies, or outgrow, I should say. Are you still going to offer, because you said allergy shots are offered to everybody, would you still offer kids allergy shots, or would you kind of wait a little bit until they're older to offer them those shots?
No, in fact, the studies actually show, kids, so a lot of allergy, like eczema and, allergic rhinitis, which is the allergies of the nose. And then next thing you develop is usually, we call it the atopic march, but then it's like asthma. And so for the younger kids, actually starting them earlier on the shots may, prevent the progression to the later stages of the asthmatic airway, right? Now, the problem you run into is getting a child to come in and do shots, right? So I don't have I have kids that are on shots, but they're mature, 6 and 7 year olds, or their parents are doing it with them. So it's like mommy and me time, come in and get your allergy shots. It's a hard thing for little kids. And I know I have 4 kids and I can tell you there is no way I'm convincing my son has allergies. He's not coming in to get an allergy shot. But what I do find what happens is usually by adolescence, things have either gotten better or they haven't and they've gotten worse. And then no teenager wants to be all sneezy and congested and sounding hyponasal, right? So they usually bring themselves in to be like, okay, I'm ready for the shots, Dr. Thobani.
That's funny. But I think that a really important point that you touched on is how you said that starting them early can help reduce the issues
progressing of that atopic march,
eczema and asthma, etc. Yeah, so I guess since we've kind of been touching on the connection between, as you said, atopic type symptoms, diseases like allergies, asthma, and eczema, if you could kind of briefly get into how they're related, because I tell my patients a lot of times, if they're asthmatic and they have allergies and they're not addressing their allergies, and I've got them on high dose inhaled steroids, I'm like, we need to address your allergies. We need to talk about some things that might be triggering, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about how they overlap.
Yeah. So, when we're talking just about the upper airway and the lower airway, they are connected, and it's sort of like that one airway hypothesis. And, you brought up a very excellent point. In fact, in patients of mine who I have a difficult time, controlling their asthma, there's 3 things that we actually think about, and we call them we say comorbid conditions, but all that means is 3 things that I have to think about before I keep escalating their medication, right? One is, am I controlling their upper airway? Because there are plenty of studies that show if the upper airway is not well controlled, it's going to have an impact on your lower airway, right? So we want to focus on treating the upper airway. The second thing that we want to focus on is, believe it or not, acid reflux can act. And this is more with adult patients that I'm talking about, or those that are 18 and over, that, acid reflux can actually there's a connection with acid reflux and asthma control as well, right? And then finally, obstructive sleep apnea. And so those are actually 3 conditions that I'm always going through and running through the back of my head when someone is coming in with asthma that's not well controlled. Now, as far as your skin and your nose and your lungs and how are they all connected? Well, there's a lot of different things going on. Recently, the research has shown so little kids who have eczema that develops really early on in life, there's a breakdown in their skin's ability to sort of trap moisture. And, eczema babies usually present with those like raw, dry patches, sometimes on their cheeks, behind their neck, on their arm. And recently we've come to think that maybe this is the route of sensitization. This is where it's starting, right? And so that's why we're even seeing that perhaps that food sensitization is coming through topically through the skin. And then we're seeing this, food allergy connection. And then we're seeing the nasal allergy connection, and then going into the lower airways. And the honest truth is it's actually not clearly defined. There's also genetic sort of predispositions. Not to get too nerdy, but there's like a gene called filaggrin, which has been associated with eczema and asthma. And so as of right now, we don't have like the gene targeted therapy and all of that, but these are things that scientists are constantly and doctors are thinking about. So there is also on a genetic level an association between the eczema and the allergies and the food allergies and the asthma as well.
I love it. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, it did get a little nerdy, but I mean, honestly, I love it. I love it. No, the more information, the better. All right. Now, before we wrap up, I feel like we cannot end this conversation without talking about some of the overlapping symptoms between allergy symptoms and COVID-19 symptoms. And the reason is I get this a lot, and employers, as well as people are coming back to work in person, they're coming in with runny noses and coughs and sneezing, and people are like, well, I don't know, is this the beginning of COVID? Is this just a cold? Are these my allergies? And so let's just, before we wrap up, talk a little bit about how we can help at least try to differentiate between those three things. Is it a cold? Is it COVID-19?
Yeah.
Are these allergies?
Excellent question. I love it. So important, right? Because even I remember last March, I'm like, we had so many phone calls because it was allergy season, the pandemic, the lockdown, all of that happened simultaneously. And I had so many patients emailing me. And one thing we've come to realize is, allergies don't cause a fever. Okay. Allergies are not going to give you chills. They're not going to give you body aches. Okay. Those three things should definitely be like, okay, we're dealing with something more infectious. Okay. Now, when it comes to things like sneezing and nasal congestion, you're going to see that more with allergies and not so much sneezing with COVID-19, right? And then when it comes to cough, well, that's challenge. I mean, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because some people, when they have allergies, it drips back. It causes them to cough. Sometimes they even complain of like a tickle or a sore throat. And that's sort of the overlap where you can get that with the COVID-19, but allergies are not, unless you have asthma, also not going to cause that, like, I can't breathe so badly, right? Where all of a sudden you're like, I can't breathe, especially if you don't have a history of asthma, right? And so a lot of just cough, body aches, fevers, chills, I can't breathe, coming from your chest, that respiratory distress is going to make you think of COVID. One that we got a lot of is the decreased smell. So most allergies don't really change your smell or taste, but if you have a sinus infection or if you have something called a nasal polyp, which is like a growth of tissue that's inside your nose, that actually can cause, the medical name is anosmia, but it makes you not smell. And that gets a little bit tricky. And as an allergist, we do see a lot of patients with allergies and then decreased ability to smell because of a nasty sinus infection. And so, if I hear that at the very beginning last year, I was like, okay, I couldn't, was it COVID or not? And, at some point you just have to, patients know their body the best too, right? I've had patients who are like, I feel like this is my usual sinus infection. This always happens this way, right? I don't have the fevers, the body aches, the chills, no COVID exposure. So it's also working with the patient and really understanding, and if it's unclear, then we get the test.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thibani, for breaking that down. I agree with you. I think I saw this infographic from the CDC, and there is a lot of like you said, and we've been talking about overlap, but there are those things that you said as far as fever, chills, body aches, severe body aches, definitely thinking of something other than your allergies. And it said that specifically when it comes to sneezing and watery and itchy eyes, then that doesn't, that's definitely allergies. Thank you so much, Dr. Thibani, for your time and your expertise and sharing that with us today. I've had a wonderful time talking with you and sharing important information with our audience, and wish you every success in your career.
Thank you. It was my pleasure as well. Lovely chatting with you.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us on another episode of What's Up, Doc. You can watch this and all our other episodes on our website at muslimnetwork.tv and on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Muslim Network TV. I'm your host, Dr. Al-Barwani, and I'll see you next time on another episode of What's Up, Doc.